to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoyed the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. It's been a little while since I did a personal stories episode, so I thought this would be a good week to do that. And when I kind of concluded the last one, I was just finishing up my time in the United States as the Chief of Defense Staff's liaison officer in the Pentagon, a job which I initially hadn't wanted for domestic reasons because we were trying to build our house, but actually which I absolutely loved when I got there, and it presented me with some incredible opportunities. And as a result of what actually happened there, one of the things that was a real benefit from it was I got promoted. I got promoted to be a 2-star officer, to be an Air Vice-Marshal, and to come back and be the Assistant Chief of Defense Staff Operations in the Ministry of Defense once again, which was a job that, frankly, as I said on the last episode that I did like this, I hadn't begun to think I would get. To be honest, I was really amazed to get there. It was without doubt one of the best 2-star jobs in defense in terms of the profile and activity and so on that was going on with it. It was a joint job, so it was a tri-service job. And in fact, I never did another single service job. I'd finished RAF Coningsby as the station commander in 2006. We're now in the back end of 2011, and I've been all joint since then. And I finished my career with 2-star appointments, which I'll cover in these personal stories over the next few episodes, because this was a big job. There was more than one episode's worth of podcast to talk about here for sure, because some of the things that happened were amazing, and I'll get to some of that as we get into it. But first of all, there was B and Air Marshal, and they're lumped together. So it's Air Vice-Marshal, Air Marshal, Air Chief Marshal, and Marshal of the Royal Air Force, although that's not a rank that normally is used these days unless the King actually bestows it on individuals, which does happen, usually only former Chiefs of Defence Staff that achieve that. And so all of those 2, 3, 4, and ultimately 5-star ranks are colloquially talked about as Air Marshal. And so suddenly I'm in that club, and it is a club. There was an Air Marshal's club. It's now an Air Officers Club, which includes 1-star officers. But we meet, we have gatherings and briefings and follow on from that forevermore. So I'm kind of in that group that now stays together, even having left the service, which is a really fabulous thing to be. It's a bit better paid, of course. You become a 2-star. Every rank carries a bit more money, so that's a plus. It's got a slightly better pension, so that's another plus. But there's a lot more to it than that. It was interesting. There were lots of things that were little nuances. You have an extra row of scrambled egg on your hat. So if you become a group captain in the Royal Air Force, you get a hat with for your best uniform hat has one row of scrambled egg, if you like, gold on the peak. And now as an air officer, it's 2 rows. You have a back row as well. So, and that's not it with the uniform. You actually end up with a whole bunch of different things on your uniform. So it's back to the tailor to have shoulder boards put on the uniform on the top, and you wear different shoulder boards depending on whether you're in the formal version of the uniform or just the kind of day-to-day. And in the formal version, you've got a gold belt and you've got gold shoulder boards, and you can wear a sword with that, obviously, as well. And you have a different sword because it's an air officer's sword. And it's it feels a bit different. So it was one of those things where it was definitely a slight moment that you give pause for thought to. It also meant that I was now a member of the RAF senior leadership team, which was obviously a limited group, 2-star and above group, that there weren't that many of us that formed that kind of, I suppose, advice group to the Chief of the Air Staff to get together regularly, discuss the way that the Air Force was shaping up and what we could do to influence that. And of course, I was slightly on the outside of the Air Force as a joint officer. So coming back into that grouping was my exposure to what my own service was doing. And that was always very, very interesting over the next few years to look at, how you could bring a different perspective, because you were seeing that joint flavor, if you like, the Army, Navy, wider defense flavor, not getting consumed by sort of single service like myopia. You're looking at it from a very much single service focused lens about the Air Force and the Air Force alone. The reality is it's not like that. Defense is a big entity. You need to work together to avoid being divided and conquered, not least by the Treasury, who will always look for opportunities to save money where there is an opportunity to do that. And so it was very, very important to be able to feed into that kind of forum in a useful way. It also meant that when I got into the job proper, I actually had a military assistant, which was the first time that had happened to me. I'd had personal assistants before, so effectively an EA, PA, whatever you like, who was looking after my diary and my kind of travel and those sorts of things in my one-star roles. But this time I actually had a proper military assistant, so a Navy lieutenant commander in the first instance, was my MA, and generally you would have one not from your own service. If you're in a joint appointment, that would be the ideal way of doing it. Didn't always work that way, but that was quite often the way that it played. And David DJ Turner was mine when I started off in that job, and I have to say I couldn't have been better served by a really fantastic man. Now, very tragically, he passed away. He lost his life to bowel cancer at way too young an age. A father with two young children. It was an utter tragedy, but he was a brilliant, brilliant guy that I worked with for about half of my tour, and then he was replaced by a chap called Craig Hansen, an army officer this time, who was equally great. And the role those individuals play is vitally important at that level, because what it did for me was it gave me headspace to actually think about and act on the things I needed to do, rather than just having everything thrown at me in the way that it would arrive and the format it would arrive and the quantity that would arrive. He, as the MA, was the first filter to turn around and take away all that stuff. So look at prioritizing what got put in front of me when I needed to see it, making sure that the team that were bringing work into the office were bringing stuff in that he would know that I would either like it or not like it. It wouldn't work in that particular way, or he would have a clear understanding of what else was going on. And I think for the individuals doing those roles, it was immensely valuable. My podcast episode with Tom Tugendhat, he'd been the MA to the Chief of Defence Staff, so obviously considerably more senior individual, and he touched a little bit on that. But that was the sort of role where you got tremendous access, because my MA would obviously sit with me in all of my meetings. He would never not be in a meeting. He would monitor all my phone calls unless I actually told him not to. So he would be completely in my mind, understanding what I was thinking, what I'd been talking about, what the discussions had been around various issues. And so was incredibly well versed to then speak back to my wider team, which I'll get to in a minute, about what was going on, and give them a really clear sense of you need to do this way, or this is what's going to be required. And a good MA worth his or her weight in gold, no question about it. Absolutely fantastic. Personal staff officer is the other term that's used. If I'd been in a single service Air Force appointment, I would have been a personal staff officer, but it's the same thing. And those individuals go back from there, back into, if you like, the mainstream normal employment, back in either their own service or into joint jobs. And I think much the wiser. They gain a huge amount of knowledge and exposure from what they did in that. And so it was the first time I'd had one of them, and learning how to get the most out of him was really important. Luckily, DJ had actually been there with my predecessor, seen how that worked, and therefore knew how he could advise me that this is how to get the best out of me doing this job, because otherwise it would have been very easy for me to kind of revert to type a little bit. And that as a leadership thing was great, because it meant he was able to kind of reverse mentor me a little bit into the role. He knew a lot of what had been going on. He could talk to me about that. And help me have a relatively soft landing, I suppose, in what was a pretty challenging environment. It was a role that was big in scope. I mean, it didn't have a huge number of people compared to some of the jobs I'd had. I can't remember now off the top of my head the exact number that were in the directorate, but you probably got in total sitting in the remit around about 100 people, I guess. And it's the operations directorate of the Ministry of Defence, so it occupies much of one floor in the in the building. And I worked directly to the 3-star Deputy Chief of Defence Staff, Military Strategy and Operations. who was Richard Barons, who's been on my podcast, who actually is a good friend still to this day, and who was my boss in subsequent role as well, actually, because he got promoted when I moved to my very final role. And again, we'll get to that in due time. But I shared the Ops Directorate role, if you like, with a civil servant. So I had a two-star civil servant who was the Director of Operational Policy for the entirety of my time. That was a guy called Vincent Devine, lovely guy who we got on famously. We sat next to each other in the open plan environment of the MOD and worked incredibly closely together with quite different but very related responsibilities about the way we were going to do things. We had a lot of roles, if you like, but the fundamentals of it where we were responsible for running the operational activity of the Ministry of Defence at home and overseas, all of it. So it didn't matter what we were doing, that was our thing, whether it was military aid to the civil authority, doing anything associated with UK activity. And we had a few of those with various strikes and things that were going on as well. But we also did a ton of work, obviously, overseas. The lion's share of things that were going on at the time I was there were Afghanistan, a little bit still left in Iraq, and obviously all of the normal things we had with the Falkland Islands, with new overseas deployments, various in all our different permanent joint operating bases. And the thing that was coming down the pipe towards us, though, was not overseas at all. It was London 2012, the Olympic and Paralympic Games that was coming about 8 months or so after I got into the job. I arrived in September of 2011, back end of September. And I can vividly remember my first conversation with the Chief of Defence Staff, General Sir David Richards at the time, and saying to him that I thought this was going to be national main effort. I could recognise that this was a no fail for the UK, and we absolutely had to be kind of on our game. And at that stage, of course, we were expecting to do a limited amount of things with the Olympics. We were expecting to do the air support, the maritime support, some special operations, some explosive ordnance demolition, those kind of things. And as I think most people know, obviously it didn't turn out that way. And I'll do a whole episode on the Olympics because I think it's worth it. It was a very big chunk of my time. It was a hugely, hugely memorable and important element of what I did. So I'll cover that slightly separately and park it for now. But that was massive. Obviously, encompassed in that operational activity is all sorts of stuff around hostage rescue and any form of crisis, pretty much. Then suddenly we would be swept into that. So I had a huge amount of engagement in the role with other government departments, particularly the Home Office, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the Department for International Development. Those are now amalgamated, so it's the FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. They're all in the same bucket. And obviously the security intelligence agencies, so GCHQ, the Security Service, and the Secret Intelligence Service, they were, still an area that I was very closely involved with. And because of the nature of the role and the type of stuff we were doing, we dealt with a huge amount of very highly classified information all the time, which was, you just got used to it, really. And I think the challenge was always trying to make sure you got used to it without being too blasé about it, that you are dealing with some of the stuff that's extremely sensitive to everything that's going on in the UK government. I did do quite a bit of travel as a result in the job. I'll talk about some of that because the link ups with key allies on the NATO front and on key areas of UK interest was important. So there's a fair amount of NATO work involved in that, and some other non-obvious things. So some counter-narcotics work that I got involved with that took me out to South America, first time I'd ever been there. So again, I'll cover some of that in future episodes as well, because I think it's that's worth a look when we get into that. The really interesting thing, and I hadn't expected this, was when we talk a lot about networks and opportunities that result from networks and the importance of connections and relationships. I spent all of 2007 really on courses. I've talked about that. I did the Higher Command and Staff course, then I did the Royal College of Defence Studies. And when I was doing those courses, of course, I made a lot of really good contacts, some great friends, some people who I've worked with a lot ever since then. And in that role as the Assistant Chief of Defence Staff Operations, it was really evident how valuable those connections were, because obviously they were, again, tri-service connections, Army, Navy, Air Force, and some civil servants, actually, who were incredibly important because I was bumping into them all the time. They were all in equally important in roles in other bits of defense. And, having that prior relationship, having that extra bit of you've shared a beer or two in the bar and you've got some kind of real personal skin in the game with them mattered, made a big, big difference to what we did. So that was really, really valuable and a useful thing to do. Domestically, it was a bit different too. I had to be within 45 minutes of the Ministry of Defence a lot of the time. So it meant that it was a job that attracted an MOD flat. I had an opportunity to live in London in a flat that was obviously rented by the MOD, and that I was then in mainly during the week. Just occasionally that occupied the odd time at the weekend, but most of the time it was weekday stuff. And I was in Canary Wharf in the Docklands area of London for a while with a flat right by the river, which was lovely. It was just a little bit further away than I really wanted to be, so I'd been there probably number of months, I suppose, and then we moved from there to a flat in Marsham Court in Westminster, which was walking distance, probably about a 10-15 minute walk to the MOD, and was lovely because it was right next to the Home Office, really central in London, the sort of place I could never dream of affording to buy, but was perfect. A little one-bedroom flat that made it really easy to do that. Our lovely new house, as a result, which was finished at the back end of the time when I was in the States, was all done. We were in, we'd moved. So that was home, if you like, but it was really home at the weekends because my wife was working as well at that stage. She was working for BAE Systems, so she spent quite a lot of time with me up in London, obviously at the during the week, and then we'll be home at the weekend. And even at home, you were never quite away from the job in this kind of role, and you never leave it behind. So I had a team turned up to install a safe and a phone, a top secret phone that I had at home. And I have to say, initially I was a bit, am I actually going to need this? It was a real massive lifesaver in many ways, in that it stopped me a number of times having to be back in London over weekends when stuff was going on that I could actually deal with on the phone without having to necessarily be physically in London, and just turning around and being aware of stuff, being authorizing things, updating people, senior people and/or more junior people about what had gone on. That made a huge difference to be able to do that. I stood in very regularly in the role as the director of operations, so the most senior operations guy in the Ministry of Defence, working directly to the Chief of Defence Staff. So that would be a role that would, when things happened that would take us into the COBRA space, the Cabinet Office Briefing Room, crisis management infrastructure that the UK has, then that would obviously be where I would be regularly heading if I was doing that. I used to be a very frequent visitor to Cobra. We had lots and lots of things that we were doing there over time, and not least around the Olympics, but also an awful lot of other events that would take us into there for a series of cross-government sort of structured meetings, and they cascaded the Cobra meetings. You'd start obviously with a sort of an officials level meeting at my own level, with equivalent kind of people from the various government departments. Then ultimately that escalate up to ministerial level and also prime ministerial level. And obviously at those, generally speaking, it will be the Chief of Defence Staff that will be sat there as the senior military advisor to the Prime Minister. But if he wasn't there, then sometimes just occasionally it would end up being either the Vice Chief of Defence Staff or the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff, Mill Stratton Operations. And if he wasn't there, it was me. So that happened a few times, and we would end up in some interesting roles. And again, I'll touch on that as I get into probably a future episode where I talk a bit more detail about some of the day-to-day that we had to deal with, because it was fascinating. There was a lot of work where you were dealing more and more with ministers, not least in the Ministry of Defence, so the ministers and the Secretary of State for Defence, but also actually up to and including prime ministerial level on a routine basis. And again, the Olympics was a big factor in all of that, with some of the things we had to prepare for. There was a huge amount going on. It was an amazingly busy job, but an amazingly rewarding job, no question about it. And that's why I think it's worth diving into some more detail on it when I get a chance to go through some of that. So I thought I'd keep it quite light touch this week, not go for too long an episode, and just set the scene really for what is to come in the next few of these personal stories episodes, where I'll touch on this. I'm conscious as well that I'm entering the twilight of my RAF career with this now. This was my penultimate job before I actually stepped outside to go and do a role at Deloitte, and then subsequently to do what I do now. And so my military stories, are coming slowly to a close. Although I'll probably dive back and talk in more detail about some of the flying aspects and things like that on some future podcasts. As ever, I'm really grateful for you listening and/or watching, because this one's obviously on video as well. And if you've enjoyed it, then please share it. Please move it around to people that who might be interested in it. Please subscribe, please like, please repost, please comment, all those sort of things when I put trailers out on all the various social media channels. That really, really helps to boost it. If you find it valuable, then please do think about sharing your value back to me and joining me on Patreon and giving me an uplift with a cup of coffee a month or similar, to turn around and make a financial difference to what I do, because this is a time-consuming activity, which I love doing. I won't make no bones about that, but I would really appreciate a bit of help if you're finding it useful to you. Then just make some kind of contribution back to me. That'd be much appreciated. Either way, though, as I always say, love you joining. Really appreciate your support, and thanks ever so much. Look forward to your feedback. That's always valuable as well. And have a great week ahead. I'll be back next week with another episode. I've got a guest episode lined up for you next week, which I think will be a lot of fun and really interesting for a lot of people, particularly if you're into the flying game, because it's a good crew on that. And I'll speak very soon. Thanks very much. Bye now. Just before I completely close this week's episode, I just wanted to refer back to Patreon and the supporters site, because I'm very conscious that there are 3 levels of support on that site. There's a supporter, there's a champion, and there's a patron. And as I said when I started it up, I wanted to give some recognition to those that are kind enough to go in at the champion or the patron level and be supportive to me. And we've got a few of those now, but the ones that I haven't mentioned since they joined are Adam Spink and Shona Blackhall, who joined at the champion level, and Frank Lloyd Murray, who's joined me as a patron. And I'm enormously grateful to the 3 of them, because it really does make a huge difference to me to get some recognition and some financial reward ultimately for doing the podcast. Whilst I love doing it, and I mention that all the time, it obviously does take lots of effort and time, and I'm still firmly in the world of paid work. So if you are up for supporting me and joining that club, then I would be really, really grateful. What I always said as well was that we'd start doing some more stuff for supporters various, and that includes the champion and the patron level, particularly when we've actually got enough to turn around and start doing something meaningful. And we're at that point pretty much now. So more news to follow, but there will be some stuff happening that is extra on top of the podcast, particularly for the patrons, because you deserve it. You're contributing to the effort I'm making here, and I want to recognise that. So I'm very grateful. I'm still trying very hard to stay away from adverts and from sponsorship, because I tend to think with the podcasts I listen to that they actually spoil it. They don't necessarily add to the podcast in a great way. But that does mean I'm quite reliant on supporters, and I don't want to go down subscription either, because I think that locks out too many people who might just otherwise go, no, I'm not going to listen. And I want the word to be spread. I want the benefit to be out there for everyone. But I'm hoping you'll feel it's at some point worth your while. So thanks very much indeed for listening to me banging on about that. Thanks particularly to those 3 new champions and patrons. I am very, very grateful. Speak soon. Thanks. Bye.